Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly whimsical, yet honestly incredibly high stakes chapter of the Infinitum campaign. We're looking at Act 2, Session 23. Now, if you've been following along with us, you know exactly what kind of pressure our heroes, the Holy Crusaders, have been under recently. They've been thrust into this completely inverted, terrifying situation where they are now literally sharing minds with their avatars, trapped inside the game and desperately trying to blend in just to avoid the wrath of Dracus. It's been tense, right? But today's explainer takes a sharp and, frankly, much needed turn away from that overarching dread and throws us headfirst into pure, unadulterated fantasy adventure. We're going to be looking at a session that is just absolutely defined by brilliant problem solving, some hilarious roleplay consequences, and I am not exaggerating when I say this, one of the most jaw-dropping cliffhangers we have seen in the campaign so far. So, think of our agenda today as our very own treasure hunter's map. We'll be hitting 5 main stops. First, a new party dynamic. Second, the Crystal Pond quest. Third, the Dragon's Tooth quest. Fourth, the Giant's Hat quest. And finally, number 5, a lunar cliffhanger. Let's get right to it. Section 1, a new party dynamic, passing the torch. Before the Holy Crusaders can even think about hunting for treasure and exploring, they really have to deal with a massive internal shift. And honestly, this part brilliantly illustrates the real human psychological toll behind these avatars. Living and hiding from Dracus in a server where Earthlings are viewed as literal monsters, that wears on a person. And Captain Dash 2, the Orc Illusionist wizard, well, she decides the constant suffocating danger is just too much. She makes the incredibly tough choice to retire, leaving the adventuring party behind so she can go live a quiet life as a regular NPC. She just wants to lay low and blend into the background. But man, the gap she leaves behind is absolutely massive. The party is suddenly left completely without their primary magic user. Enter Brother Ezekiel. Played by Drake, this halfling cleric of the life domain realizes that he really has to step up in a major way. The old dynamic relied so heavily on Captain Dash 2's crowd control and her utility magic, but this new dynamic? It places the heavy burden of the party's survival squarely onto the small but capable shoulders of Ezekiel as the main healer. It is a massive test of his abilities right out of the gate. So, with their new party dynamic somewhat settled, they pull out a treasure map they managed to snag from the Cave of Wonders. And I gotta tell you, this isn't your standard weathered epic pirate parchment. Not at all. This thing looks like it was drawn by a child. It's covered in these silly doodles of smiling frogs wearing crowns and stick figures excitedly pointing at chests. To progress, the party realizes they have to decipher these incredibly quirky childlike notes scribbled in the margins. We're talking phrases like, "The flowers tickle," or "Mom said don't swim," and "If the water isn't glowing, come back later." It's so funny because these completely innocent, almost nonsensical scribbles perfectly set the tone for the Rule of 3 quests they're about to undertake. Moving to Section 2, the Crystal Pond quest, giggling spores and alcoholic water. Okay, so let's walk through their first actual adventure on this map. This whole segment is just an absolute masterclass in the vivid, sensory storytelling that the fantasy server is so well known for. It's not just about what the players are seeing, it's about what they hear, what they smell, and what they taste. The map outlines this hilarious, sequential journey. First off, they use a Speak with Animals spell to convince some local birds to guide them. And along the way, they're snacking on these bizarre bacon-flavored berries. I mean, only in the fantasy server, right? Eventually, they reach the flower field. Now, remember that weird note, "The flowers tickle"? Well, it turns out these flowers are constantly spurting out spores into the air. Arya and Barkin accidentally inhale a huge lungful of them and just immediately start giggling completely uncontrollably. They're practically incapacitated with laughter, forcing Antonella and Zato to literally drag their giggling bodies through the rest of the field. Next up on the childlike map, they find the Big Frog Rock. Ezekiel, being the inquisitive halfling he is, pokes the rock with a stick. Suddenly, it starts gushing this liquid that tastes exactly like a pina colada. So they follow this sparkly pina colada creek all the way down until it dumps into the crystal pond. Ezekiel, probably thinking it's safe, jumps right in. But almost immediately, he starts struggling to stay afloat. Barkin dives in to save him and makes a shocking discovery. The pond water is purely alcoholic. Barkin's massive barbarian constitution can handle the booze, but little Ezekiel? He gets completely blackout intoxicated from just being in it, and Zato actually has to use lay on hands just to sober him up. Suddenly, that note, "Mom said don't swim," makes perfect, hilarious sense. But here's where the actual puzzle kicks in. The real treasure lies 200 feet at the bottom of this completely alcoholic pond. Following the final note, "If the water isn't glowing, come back later," the party decides to just sit back and wait for nightfall. Sure enough, as the moon rises, a single moonbeam strikes the surface of the water. Down at the bottom, a crystal chest clicks open, releasing a glowing greatsword that begins to float. But of course, there's a massive catch. When Barkan tries to swing down and grab it, the sword magically repels him, pushing him away like opposite sides of a magnet. Zato tries a different approach and tries to lasso the hilt, but the magic just violently pushes the rope away too. And before they can figure anything else out, the moonbeam shifts, the light fades, and the sword sinks right back into the chest, which locks shut. So I pose this question to you. How in the world do you grab a sword that magically repels your every physical attempt to touch it? Well, the next morning they chat with some local kids playing nearby. The kids explain that literally no one can ever get the sword because of that repelling magic, and it only ever surfaces under direct, unbroken moonlight. And guys, this is where Brother Ezekiel truly shines in his new role. He comes up with this genius plan. He casts Control Water to physically separate the pond water, effectively shaping the water itself into a giant, magnifying lens. Then he casts a subtle daylight spell, shining it directly through that water lens to perfectly mimic the properties of moonlight right in the middle of the day. The chest at the bottom gets tricked, it clicks open, and the sword floats up. While Ezekiel is straining to hold his concentration on both spells, Antonella uses her draconic ancestry to swoop in and fly over the water. And here's the brilliant part. Because she is draconic, the sword's magic actually allows her to grasp the hilt. She claims the Moonblade. It is an absolutely incredible weapon that deals extra damage during the day and a massive double damage at night. It's just a breathtaking display of combining clever spellcraft with specific character traits to completely bypass a puzzle. Section 3. The Dragon's Tooth Quest. High stakes and exploding bears. Now, if that first quest was all about whimsical, clever problem solving, this second one abruptly dials the danger all the way up. It's a perfect contrast, showing the colorful, childlike aesthetic of the fantasy server right alongside some brutally high-stakes combat consequences. The timeline of this particular quest is just pure chaos. First, they find themselves having to navigate a massive field filled with 5-foot-tall flowers. They have to literally military crawl and sneak underneath the petals just to avoid these massive, aggressively pollinating giant bees. But the real trouble starts shortly after when they enter a nearby cave that happens to contain an enormous sleeping bear. Now remember that alcoholic crystal pond from a few hours ago? Well, Ezekiel and Barkan still completely reek of alcohol, and that strong, disturbing scent wakes the giant beast right up. A brutal, terrifying fight instantly breaks out in the tight quarters of the cave. Antonella immediately puts her brand new Moonblade to work, fighting shoulder to shoulder with Ezekiel. They eventually manage to bring the bear down, but the relief is short-lived. Upon death, the bear's corpse rapidly swells up and violently explodes, absolutely covering Antonella and Ezekiel in blood and guts. It is a very harsh, very sticky reminder that even here in the whimsical fantasy server, survival is still incredibly gritty. So, completely covered in bear guts, the party presses on. They eventually pass this massive, 50-foot dragon rib bone sticking out of the earth and arrive at a location the map calls the Smoky Hill. At the top of this hill, they find a weird stone pedestal holding a single, giant dragon tooth. By gathering some smaller teeth scattered around the area and placing them into the specific runes on the pedestal, a riddle magically etches itself onto the giant tooth. It reads, "The power of a dragon doesn't come from its breath, but it's blank, 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 blank." It's a 4-letter word. Take a second, put yourself in their shoes. What would you guess? Literally, after hours of in-game guessing and debating, Ezekiel just suddenly blurts out the answer in frustration, "Roar." And instantly, the giant tooth cracks cleanly open. Sitting right inside is the dragon's fang, a truly magnificent greatsword carved entirely from dragon bone. Barkan steps up and claims it, and he instantly feels its immense magical powers surging through him. This isn't just any sword. It allows the wielder to harness raw elemental damage, so we're talking fire, ice, lightning, or acid on strikes. And, even better, it can unleash a terrifying, echoing dragon's roar once a day to completely frighten and paralyze enemies. Barkan now has a weapon that perfectly, flawlessly matches his zealous barbarian rage. That brings us to Section 4, the Giant's Hat Quest, Sneaking, Riddles, and Endless Stardust. So, where the last quest was incredibly combat-heavy and gritty, this final one forces the party to use stealth, social interaction, and some serious lateral thinking. And the landmarks on this part of the map are just wonderfully bizarre. First, they have to find the Duck Rock. Zato spots it. It's literally just a giant stone shaped exactly like a rubber duck. Not knowing what else to do, Ezekiel and Antonella just start loudly quacking at it. Turns out it's just a rock, and they immediately get mocked and laughed at by some local kids who are watching them from the bushes. The party chases the kids down and eventually manages to bribe them with the rest of those weird bacon-flavored berries to act as guides. The kids lead them to the next landmark, the cow tree. It's this strange, hollow tree filled with holes that actually moves like a cow whenever the wind blows through it. Finally, the kids point them to a steep 30-foot cliff. Barkin, being his usual stubborn self, tries to just free climb the sheer rock face and keeps falling over and over, taking a bunch of damage in the process. When they all finally manage to struggle to the top, the clanking of Zato's heavy armor wakes up a sleeping giant. Things are about to go terribly, terribly wrong for our wounded party, but then Zato steps up and begins to sing. He performs a lullaby so incredibly beautiful and rolls so well on his performance that even the rest of the adventuring party gets drowsy, and the giant just peacefully drifts back to sleep. They avert a total crisis through pure amusing roleplay. Now, carefully sneaking past the snoring giant, they reach a massive, cone-shaped tower. This is the giant's hat. But the giant wooden door is magically locked. Whenever Zato tries to force it open with his strength, a magical force field violently pushes him back. When Ezekiel steps up and gently touches the knob, a logic riddle appears on the wood, written entirely in giant speech. It asks, what must be broken before it can be used? Now, it's so easy as Earthling players to start throwing out modern guesses here. A glue stick, a piñata. But Ezekiel stops the group and actually thinks about the deep context of where they are. They are currently existing inside a medieval fantasy server. Modern items like glow sticks literally do not exist here. The answer has to fit the rules and reality of the world they are in. He quickly realizes the answer is an egg. Barkin, who knows the language, steps up and translates, speaking the word egg aloud in giant speech. The magic dissipates, and the heavy door clicks unlocked. The party enters and begins climbing this massive, sprawling spiral staircase, where every single step is 2 feet high, built for a giant. They pass entire floors just stuffed with giant books and weird baubles, until they finally reach the very top room. This room is an observatory, filled with huge telescopes pointing out of the windows. But in the center is one final locked closet, guarded by one final riddle etched into the frame. The more of it there is, the less you see. And in a rare, completely uncharacteristic moment of sheer puzzle-solving genius from the barbarian, Barkin just immediately blurts out darkness. The door unlocks and swings open. Inside, they find a glowing, star-covered hat, which Ezekiel immediately equips, finding that it instantly boosts the power of all his healing magic. But Barkin finds something else, a small pouch of endless stardust. Like a kid in a candy store, he starts joyously grabbing handfuls and throwing the glowing dust absolutely everywhere around the room. But in doing so, the dust settles on and coats a creature standing silently by one of the telescopes. It reveals a gnome. This poor gnome explains he has been cursed with permanent invisibility, lamenting his incredibly lonely, completely untrusted existence in the world because nobody could ever see him. Barkin, moved by this really deep, surprising compassion, simply takes a small pinch of the dust for himself and then hands the endless pouch right over to the gnome. He gives this stranger the ability to finally, permanently be seen by the world again. It is such a beautiful, genuinely touching moment of roleplay. Which leads us right into Section 5, a lunar cliffhanger. The sky changes forever. So the narrative of this session takes a massive, dramatic turn right here at the very top of the giant's tower. The newly visible gnome, who is literally crying with joy, steps aside and tells the Holy Crusaders to take a look through the telescope he had been using. Zato steps up to the glass lens. He aims it up into the night sky, pointing it directly at the moon. And remember, this is the very same moon that just the night before provided the moonbeam to power their new moonblade. And this moment just brilliantly illustrates how shockingly fast the game world of Infinitum can shift under their feet. As Zato is narrating what he sees through the glass to the rest of the group, his confident voice slowly trails off into a tone of absolute panic. He says, and I quote, "Oh no, it just dissipated into a cloud of smoke. It's no longer there, it's just gone." The moon of the fantasy server has literally vanished into nothingness right before their very eyes. Which leaves us with this massive, terrifying, provocative question. What does the disappearing moon actually mean for the world of Infinitum? I mean, was this an action taken by Drakis from the core server to mess with them? Is it some sort of weird, glitchy side effect of the Earthling players being physically trapped in the game? Or is there an even deeper, more terrifying mechanical collapse happening within the game's code itself? The Holy Crusaders have just geared up with these incredible legendary weapons, but they are now facing a celestial event that literally changes the sky forever. You absolutely will not want to miss what happens next as they try to survive the dark. Thank you guys so much for exploring this incredible session with me today. Keep those minds sharp, and I will see you in the next explainer.